a program that I have been looking to for a long time. I think it was a couple of years ago when I first got an email from Tyler saying he was working on a book about Father Tom Oddo and could I direct him to different resources or whatever. And then, a long time went by. And then I heard that the book was going to be coming out. And it was going to be coming out a little later, and then a little later. And finally, I think I was actually in Rome when I heard that there was actually a publication date. Um, but as a Dignity Boston member and as a national leader, I had certainly heard lots about Father Tom Oddo, one of our first truly national leaders in the movement and a beloved chaplain in the early days of Dignity Boston. But I never met him. So I learned so much in reading this book, and am really glad that we're able to have this conversation with the author of Against the Current, Tyler Bieber. Tyler is joining us from Portland, Oregon, where he is, let me get there's a lot of information. Tyler identifies as a queer higher education professional. He has taught at Clark College, the National University of Natural Medicine, Linfield University School of Nursing, and the Oregon School of Massage. He's currently serving as the assistant registrar at Willamette University's Pacific Northwest College of Art. Tyler has a BA in Liberal Arts and Sciences from Evergreen State College and an MA in Higher Education and Student Affairs from the University of Portland. So, Tyler, we are very happy to welcome you to this Dignity USA event and to a conversation about one of our own, which is a really unusual event for us. So, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you all for being here. It's really special to see people of different generations, all within the Dignity fold, here in the same place to talk about Tom and the life and legacy that he led. So thank you all for making the time and for your interest in this story. It's really a fascinating story to me, both as a life story and as sort of a parable of the early gay rights movement in the U.S. One that I think a lot of people don't know about, and I think rightfully should. Not just gay Catholics, but gay people in general, queer people across the U.S., and people who are not identified as LGBTQ, but that still should learn this story as a profiling courage in the gay rights movement. So I was asked to kind of talk a little bit about the origin of the book, kind of where it came from and the inspiration for it. I first discovered the name Father Tom Oddo not really because of my proximity to the University of Portland, but because of research for another project. I graduated from the University of Portland School of Education with a master's in 2018. So I had spent about 2 years on the campus, literally in the building next to the Oddo Memorial at UP. And I don't think ever once run into Tom's name. And if I did, there was no resonance to me. There was no meaning behind it. I just didn't know the story. And then fast forward a couple of years, I started researching for another project. It was a book profiling university presidents in the Pacific Northwest. One of the chapters, I was doing some research on the University of Portland, and it kind of led me to this University History by James T. Connolly. It's a fantastic book about the first 100 years of the university. And it specifically talks about kind of the evolution of the Catholic character of the university, since it is one of several Holy Cross institutions. And there is a chapter specifically about the 1980s where a large portion of that chapter is dedicated to Tom's presidency. And as I was reading through that chapter, again, just trying to gather research notes for this other project, I became more and more fascinated the more I read about him. The fact that he was a young president that really endeared himself to the students at UP, the fact that he was a Catholic priest who had fought for gay people and had fought on behalf of the rights of gay people, and tried to kind of change certain things about the church, at least in the American church. These were all things that really fascinated me. But I realized that there weren't many standalone resources on him besides this chapter in this one book. And as I was thinking about where could I find more research, I started thinking maybe I could be the one to write a book about Father Tom. As crazy as that idea seemed to me, because I had never once thought I would be a biographer ever for anybody. But the more I read, the more I researched, the more I realized how important of a figure he is and how important his story was and continues to be. And so I decided, after a couple of days of thinking about it, maybe I should write the book. And now here we are 3 years later talking about it. And there are people from all across the country on this call. So I couldn't be more thankful and grateful that you're all here to have that conversation.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
thank you so much for that background. That's a really intriguing path, right? We don't like straight paths anywhere in this community, so it's great to hear how it came kind of out of nowhere, and it sounds like there was some inspiration behind it too, which is a very resonant theme for us. Yeah, so you you have a whole chapter in the book that's dedicated to Tom's role in Dignity, which of course I found to be the most fascinating and interesting chapter in the book. And of course, he kind of was part of the early LGBTQ rights movement, what was then called the gay rights movement, in the Boston area. So, can you talk a little bit about those early days and how his commitment to equality got him involved with Dignity Boston, or actually in the origin story of Dignity Boston?
yeah, absolutely. So it was actually it was a homily that he delivered at Newman Center in Boston. After which, a conversation between a guy named Paul Dietrich and Tom and a few others, eventually over time, created this small group called Dignity Boston that then blossomed, as we know, into the organization that became the Dignity Boston organization, and that helped to kind of contribute to that original national board for Dignity USA. So that conversation after that homily in 1972 started Dignity Boston. Within the year, they were growing to having regular meetings that attracted people from across 3 different states that were regularly attending these meetings. And as a result of this, the Boston contingent, I think, was really well represented at the first national conference in 1973. And it was at that conference when the first national board of the new organization called Dignity USA was elected by the delegates. Tom, Paul, several other Boston folks were there, and they were elected as that first board. So Paul became the president, Tom became national secretary.
And Jack Hart, who is on this gathering tonight, was also one of the officers, right? The
Correct.
treasurer, I believe, Jack, right? You can correct. But yeah, so the early national leadership for the organization once it shifted out of its California base. Great. Um, One of the things that I know you've brought a little bit of the book you want to read for folks who haven't had a chance to read any of the book. We have that. And then you also have a couple of video clips so we can actually see and hear Tom in action, which I think is amazing.
Yeah, so the 1970s in the gay rights movement in general, I think is a fascinating decade. There are a lot of stories that remain untold from that time. But this part of the book really just stresses kind of the need that was growing and also the kind of early recognition of Dignity's efforts. And this, again, is from the chapter on dignity from my book, Against the Current. Serving as chaplain to the growing network of Dignity chapters across the U.S. meant Tom became an accessible figure for news outlets to contact when they sought the opinion of clergy who work with gay people, an exceedingly rare breed of priests in the early 1970s. His first real national news exposure came a month after his Fitchburg Sentinel letter, when the Boston Globe ran a multi-page feature as part of a larger series on Catholicism. The Homosexual, the Catholic Church, and Dignity was the third story in the series by Kay Longcope, the first openly queer reporter at the outlet. On the front page of the story, which ran in the Globe magazine, a photo portrait of Tom appears with a slight smile, the camera placed so close it appears uncomfortable, causing an effect similar to a Richard Avedon portrait. The photo caption is a quotation from Tom: "Most gays throw away the church because of the guilt drilled into them." Longcope's story, in parallel, began with anecdotes of gay Catholics who felt unwanted and cast out by the church. To their collective pain, Tom could only empathize. It's a real hang-up, he said to Longcoat. Either they sublimate their guilt by dropping the whole structure imposed on them, or they try not to express themselves sexually. The article made a note that, for gay Catholics, the problem of rejection was worse than in Protestant denominations, where congregants weren't required to confess their sins to their ministers. Tom not only believed that he and gay Catholics shouldn't feel excluded from living full lives, but that priests should help. As priests for gays, we have to be different from the old church, maintains Father Oddo, who serves as chaplain to the Boston group. Some gays may conceive of Dignity as a support group not to have sex, but we encourage them to be full persons, he said. The article was sure to mention the things Dignity wasn't. It was neither a group in competition with Protestant and Catholic congregations, nor a pseudo-swinger group focused solely on finding sex partners. It was, in fact, a group that opened doors but kept the line of Catholicity. Though members of other faiths are welcome, Catholicism is not minimized. Neither is sexuality played up. Quote, "We don't emphasize gayness in the liturgy," declared Father Oddo, who celebrates Mass for the group. "We are careful to stay away from primary identification with the sexual." Tom's efforts at St. Clement's Archdiocesan Eucharistic Shrine on Boylston Street and the efforts of the Homophile Forum group at St. Clement's produced a Dignity chapter with monthly meetings drawing upwards of 60 to 70 attendees from 3 states. It was clear a demand existed for this kind of group, and Dignity was sorely needed in the church.
Sorry. That's marvelous. Really makes you want to know what else happens in the story after this gets started. So, you talk about some of the TV shows that focused on the emergence of a queer Catholic movement at that time, and that Tom was not afraid to be a spokesperson, or at least was willing to tell the story and to tell our story at that time. That must have been incredibly unusual at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's interesting is that there are not a lot of video recordings or footage, at least that I could find, of Father Tom. As much as he was a public face of this movement, there are few archival reels that are left. And I think a large reason why, and this is what I found when I was looking for news reporting from when he was here in Portland, a lot of tapes from those times were eventually taped over by places that would have kept anything in their archives, like local news stations. And so when I was looking for footage of Tom, because I thought it would be helpful to kind of get a sense of who he was as a person from watching footage and from hearing him communicate as an actual person and not just through what he wrote, I went looking first to YouTube, actually, to see if I could find anything. And what was interesting was I didn't find anything that was specifically Tom Oddo labeled. There was nothing that said this is a Tom Oddo speech or there's Tom Oddo footage, nothing like that. But I did find a film that was created in 1977 by Dignity called Being Gay and Catholic with Dignity. And it is this very interesting kind of homemade movie made at that time that shows footage of the Dignity lifestyle, of Dignity mass groups, of Dignity folks, and basically emphasizes kind of the joy and the love behind being gay and also being Catholic. And within this footage, mind you, within this random video that I found in the depths of YouTube, there is a 1:44 snippet of Tom from 1977 at what I believe is New York City Pride that summer. And he speaks off the cuff, I think really appropriately for this group, about the importance of dignity and about the growth of the organization at that time. So this is footage I didn't know existed, but that I happily kind of ran into. And so I will share it with you guys now.
So this is why those hashtags are so important, and archiving our materials, yeah, is great. You can,
Sorry, y'all. Let's do this.
it's okay.
Okay. Can you see the screen? Okay.
Not yet.
Oh, let's do this. There we go. It would be nice if I hit the share button, right?
Here we go.
I'm Father Tom Oddo, the National Secretary of Dignity. I want to share with you a little bit of the excitement that we feel of what's happening in Dignity across the country. We're a national organization of gay and concerned Catholics who are really seeking to show and express Christ's love to all people, regardless of their sexual preference. And we now have chapters in about 40 cities of our country, with many people in all of our states and also foreign countries. And lots of great things are happening. Our organization centers around three particular concerns: the religious concern, social, and educational. We've been gathering in these chapters to celebrate the Eucharist in the real pursuit of the religious dimensions of our lives, also gathering to educate both gay and straight people that for the long time a gay person growing up has felt the incompatibility of their being both gay and Catholic. But we're trying to help people, both the church and gay Catholics themselves, to understand that that's not necessarily the case, and that gay people can be both close to God and live the fullness of their Catholic religion, and also live fully their sexual orientation as gay people. We understand that gay people are gay and even look upon that as God's having created them as gay, and therefore feel that they, like all other people, are called to live their sexuality in a responsible and uplifting way. We've received some very official and happy support from the various officials of the Catholic Church in a number of the dioceses of the country, really letting us happen and kind of sharing with us in a supporting way our pastoral work. So we share that excitement with you and ask you to be a part of us in that great movement of living the fullness of both religion and one's sexuality. Thank you.
Well, I can't even imagine what that's like for people who knew Tom back in the 70s, to see him articulating so well the mission that still exists and some of the issues that we are still dealing with 50 years after this was recorded. Um, let's hold on to that, and when we have time to discuss, I would love to hear people's responses to that. Yeah, that's amazing to see. Thank you for sharing it.
Yeah, so when I share that clip, I made the joke because I've shared this clip. I try and share these clips because there are three total that I like to share with groups. The third of which I do share clips of or snippets of, but I'll recommend that y'all check out. That is the visit of Ronald Reagan to the University of Portland in 1984. Completely separate chapter. It's a very interesting watch. But the two clips that I'm going to show you tonight, this is the first one of the two that focus primarily on Tom. I've made the joke at prior events that there's a reason why they made him national secretary. He's very very easy communicator, or at least communication was something that came naturally to him, which was fascinating because as I was researching into Tom and his ability kind of as a speaker, but also as a leader, one thing that came up was the fact that he could be at times stubborn and sometimes difficult to work with in terms of trying to coach as a public speaker. And so I have to think everything he wants to say is in there. And sometimes just how he wants to say it was a challenge. And so when you see a clip like this, where just off the cuff, he is speaking for a minute and a half, 2 minutes about the mission of Dignity without notes, without really pausing, without really skipping a beat. It speaks to his ability, I think, as a communicator, that despite those difficulties, he can get that message across so well, and that it feels so
And,
time.
be, and beyond his articulateness about this, the passion and the absolute commitment that he has to this message is just so evident. So, yeah, thank you for sharing with us. That's a treasure.
So this was right at the end of his tenure as national secretary. This is around 1977 when Tom does this piece for this film. After that, he is still in the Dignity fold. He is still a national chaplain. He still works with the organization, but he is primarily associated at that point with Stonehill College in Boston. And at Stonehill, he is a faculty member. He's a very popular faculty member who eventually becomes an acting chair of the religious studies department. That's his one administrative post that he has in higher education before he becomes president of the University of Portland, which really, I think, underlines his youth. And at that time, in his mid-30s, he is having public conversations never debates, I was told, but conversations about gays in the church, about being gay and being Catholic, about gay rights in general. He is also teaching a course on human sexuality and theology, about problems of human sexuality in Christian theology, really endearing himself to students. And he also is still a public figure in the Boston area when it comes to gay rights and education on being gay and being Catholic. He's really speaking, I think, to a really interested audience at that time who's still interested in learning more, but they're starting to become suspicious, at least as the starting kind of bits of the AIDS epidemic start to make their way into the news. There is this kind of sneaking suspicion about what does it mean to be gay and Catholic? Can someone actually be gay and Catholic? Can somebody be gay and Christian? And so there's a local news documentary that's put together in early 1981 by WNAC TV. That is a local news affiliate in Boston. And it's done by a guy named Alex Frisby, who was gracious enough to look through his private collection to try and find footage of this. But it was a local news program that for an hour basically talked about the issues of being gay and being Christian, being openly homosexual and being part of a church community from differing viewpoints and perspectives. And so there were multiple differing opposing viewpoints. One was an evangelical pastor. There was at least one other Protestant clergyman. Tom was somebody who believed that there should be a more accepting church overall. And so he was kind of a counterbalancing voice. And while his interview segments did not survive, again, this is one of those programs I have to assume was recorded over largely. There was a snippet of his footage from that documentary that did survive. And I think it's maybe even more impactful as footage than any interview that he could have given. And I'll show you why once I share it. It is a shorter clip. Let me get that pulled up here. And this is the second of the two clips I'll be showing to y'all. And again, this is from 1981. This is from a program called All God's Children.
I think there are folks here who'll be familiar with that. God.
Oh. Can y'all hear that okay? Were y'all able to hear it? Okay.
We didn't get any sound.
Oh, let's try this one more time.
It worked earlier, folks, so it's coming.
Interesting. Time. So the sound is not playing, but I can still at least tell you.
It's, you know what? It's muted. There's if you unmute the sound button.
Oh,
there we go.
Oh, yeah, it is. Okay, here we go.
1% of the population is estimated to be homosexual. Most of their number are indifferent or hostile to the church which has rejected them. But in many cities, small groups of gay men and lesbians, committed Protestants, Catholics, and Jews, are increasing in strength and purpose, affirming their right to worship as they please. Members of the traditional churches are concerned about what they see as bizarre lifestyles, promiscuity, the erosion of marriage and family life. Gay people and straight people ask if we are indeed all God's children.
So I really like that footage for a couple of reasons. The first being I love that it was kind of the cut to commercial, that Tom was part of kind of the bumper to commercial, because it really identified him, I think, with the program and with the message that, you know, maybe gay people can also be God's children too. But also the fact that in 1981, as I mentioned, the reports of AIDS are starting to make news, and it's starting to become evident that there is a public health crisis that is growing in the U.S. And at that time, it is becoming increasingly difficult for people to be openly identified as being gay. The fact that all the people that you just saw chose to be part of that documentary in 1981 speaks to their courage. And that includes Tom. The fact that he was willing to put himself out there as a priest identified with that movement at a time that it was becoming incredibly difficult to do so. I like to highlight that when I mention this to people as I speak to groups, because people don't often know kind of what the fear was at that time, or what the risks were. So I like to mention.
Absolutely. Such a critical time in our community when, and just the act of touching people's foreheads, then, people were starting to be afraid of, having any kind of contact, not understanding how HIV, or not even knowing that HIV is what caused AIDS, and being afraid to be anywhere close to somebody who identified as gay. And yeah, just so the intimacy of that and how close people were, and some familiar faces. Even though I did not start at Dignity until 1982, there are people in that video that I remember. I'm sure others on this call will know even more of them. Yeah, really rich and important information to be sharing. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then you mentioned that, he really went from being a teacher and sort of having, for a short time, an administrative role in a department level at
Yes.
a small college, run by the Holy Cross community, uh, to becoming president of one of their major educational institutions in Portland. But that seems like just an totally unexpected path for him.
Yeah.
Had he sought to do administrative work, or what is your sense of how he came into that role at University
So
of Portland as president at, what, 35 or something?
So he was hired at 37, assumed the role at
37.
38. And so he kind of, over the summer of him assuming the position, became 38 years old. I have to reflect on the fact I just turned 30, and I cannot imagine within 8 years assuming the presidency of a university in my wildest dreams. As much as I believe in my abilities as an administrator, I could never imagine taking on that role. And I don't think Tom ever imagined it either for himself. It's not something that he would have sought out on his own. He was, I think, very comfortable being a teacher, and more importantly, being at Stonehill, being in Boston, in a place that was familiar to him, that he had been around basically all of his life. But what happened was there was a perfect storm of factors that I think contributed to Tom getting the presidency. The first being the sort of crisis moment at the University of Portland at that time. They were in the middle of an interim presidency, and it was after Brother Raphael Wilson resigned the presidency in 1981. He had served there for about 3 years. He had come right out of the faculty, and he had primarily been a faculty first sort of president, where he had a primary focus on faculty constituency over other campus constituency groups. Because of some mishandlings and, some missteps, he decided, I resigning the presidency, I'm going back to teaching. And so what the university then is focused on is a conversation about who they want to be their next leader. They had seen enrollment dwindling over time and had started to question whether or not the university should move away completely from being a Catholic university at all. There was a question of whether or not they should have picked a lay person to becoming president, which has only recently happened in the university's history. If you know the university's list of presidents, only the most recent president has been a lay person. So at this time, it's sort of an unthinkable prospect. The alternative is to pick someone completely different, someone new, someone that has this kind of fresh approach that could bring kind of a new insight to the role. And for somebody that was both 37 and only an acting department chair for 1 year, I think Tom represented a lot of that kind of fresh approach that folks were looking for. So much so that at least 2 people in the finalist list that I was able to confirm agreed to appear as finalists in that search, basically in name only. They were not actual candidates for the role. It was very much that Tom was more of an inside pick than I think what was led on by those involved in the search. Nevertheless, he represented, I think, a change for the University of Portland, and I think as the regents, as the hiring committee initially believed, and I think rightfully so, he was that right pick. He was that right choice.
Yeah, and although, of course, I came to the book because of the dignity tie and all the great things I'd heard about Tom as a young dignitarian, I, I really found the succeeding chapters where it talked about Tom's presidency and all of the challenges he faced. It really hooks you around the challenges that higher education was facing from society, and certainly how Catholic higher education was struggling with its place in the world, and how much of external society should be let in, and how do these debates that are happening in the larger society, how do those get reflected on college campuses? It wasn't just a new job. He was thrown into this at a really challenging time. As you said, the enrollment was declining, the tuition and fees were climbing, costs were becoming expensive, government grants were in question, all of some stuff that sounds very familiar right now in terms of higher education. Can you talk? And I was struck by the ways that you use two debates that were happening. How students with AIDS, or how the question of HIV and AIDS would be handled on the campus, and the whole questions of should the University of Portland allow co-ed dorms to happen. How can you talk a little bit about those debates and how Tom handled them as a leader in a setting that was new to him?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, University of Portland and Portland area was new to Tom. Boston was definitely home to him. And so he is kind of thrust into this new environment at a really kind of tumultuous time, as Marianne's talking about, not just in the church, but also just in society in general. There's at least one chapter in the book that focuses on Tom's talking about peace and ethics in society, mm-hmm. because those were major topics of conversation in the mid 80s when he is president. But at least in terms of the AIDS crisis, right around 1985 and 86 is when it's becoming very apparent in Portland that AIDS is spreading, that it is in the city. And there is a lot of misinformation being shared not only among Portlanders, but also among UP students. There was a poll that I found in the Beacon, which is the student newspaper at UP. Fantastic resource. Their archive is. This book would not have happened without it. And I have to say that like every time I mention it. Within that archive, there is a poll that was done in early 1986 that was asking kind of what readers' opinions were about folks giving blood that were HIV positive, that were positive for having AIDS. And the variety of responses, I think, was concerning enough that people decided maybe we should take a more proactive stance and maybe we should do more in terms of educating people. Because even folks that were kind of higher level students, I think there was even one faculty member that was cited, were spreading, this misinformation about how the disease could be spread through touch or through kissing people, how there was concern about people donating blood and about whether or not people would get blood that was positive, and how that could be not ethical. There was a lot of misinformation that was spreading around campus. So early on, there is this effort to create educational forums around AIDS. And Tom moderated several of these forums, the first of which not only included campus ministry and the University Health Center, they also invited a guy named Jim Christopher on campus who was at that time openly gay and living with AIDS. And he provided perspectives as a gay man living with AIDS in that moment in Portland. And so through that single event, you had dozens of students and staff attending that could then learn whole different perspective on the disease from what they had probably learned from their friends or what they had heard from other people, a lot of which was not true. After that, Tom also used the University Health Center to create a pamphlet that was an informational pamphlet on AIDS, specifically education on the misinformation. That was handed out, I believe, in fall 1987 to all people on the university mailing list got that fall. And so he's using the university press essentially to spread the word about AIDS education. And he's having
Catholic University Press.
That's right. At a Catholic university in 1986, 1987, he's using these resources to do that. And he's having conversations with folks on campus about how they will not discriminate on the basis of a person's health or status when it comes to HIV, which all of these things, you would be hard pressed to find institutions doing as many things proactively at that time as Tom was, especially in the Catholic fold. There were institutions that were doing a lot at that time for students with AIDS and just in terms of AIDS education. But the fact that Tom was doing so much, I think, not only speaks to, again, his passion for what he was doing, his passion for the gay community, but also I think his personal connection. I have to imagine, and I do in the book, this is a time when he is getting successive horrible phone calls across the country about friends who are starting to pass away. And I have to imagine that urgency probably also fueled his want to do something proactive at the university. And that was one example. Another example, as Marianne mentioned, was the co-ed housing. This was something that was more reflective of a reality at the university that many students could not reconcile why it was not reflected on the main campus. And I'll explain why. The university maintains a program in Salzburg, Austria, and at that time, it was coeducational. And so students who were male and female, they cohabitated all the time in Salzburg. And for about 15 years before it happened, before co-ed housing came to UP, student protesters were making that very argument. Why is it okay in Salzburg and not okay here? And when Tom became president, in one of the first forums that he held with students, he was asked point blank, would you be okay with coeducational housing? He said he had no problem with it. He had seen it reflected and work well at Stonehill. And so he thought it would probably be no problem at the university. It still took him almost 5 years to implement co-ed housing at the university, which I think was cause for plenty of consternation among students and concern among some who thought maybe this guy will be the one to let it happen finally. Maybe this guy who's a little bit younger, who's maybe closer to my age, will think that this is okay. There was actually at one point, because Tom was so concerned about getting so much community buy-in for this before making the final decision, there was at least one staff person who went on record saying, I thought that this was going to work in 1982, and I don't think it's going to work now by 1984. So there were people, their minds were starting to change as Tom was not making a decision. When he finally made the decision to allow for one dorm to become coeducational in 1987, it was less than 18 months later that they were designating a second to be coeducational. Right. And so there was automatically a demand for more as soon as it happened. So by the time that Tom made it happen at the University of Portland, it was not only a non-issue to students and community members, but I think it reflected a huge changing trend in higher education. And I think that's evidenced in the fact that a second dorm opened up so quickly afterwards.
Yeah. But the growth and the resistance over time sort of doesn't surprise me, as we were seeing, the Catholicism in general, institutional Catholicism, becoming more conservative. All that energy from post-Vatican II was starting to dissipate a bit. We had, there was tension in the leadership in the U.S. about all these liberal things and the church being a bulwark against immorality and all of that. So in some ways, it doesn't surprise me, but it's great that it succeeded. Again, all of this is really fascinating. We can't do it justice in, an hour-long conversation, but I do want to